Hey there, and welcome to the Catching Up with Casey show, where we talk about anything and everything that has to do with building cohesive, vision-driven teams. I am Casey Watts, school impact strategist and the host of this show. Now, if you are here, then you inevitably are an instructional leader who wants to make change happen, even when change seems impossible. And you can do that if you have cohesive, vision-driven teams that have done clarity work. They know exactly where they're headed and how they're going to get there. These teams have done identity work, and they've built their self and social awareness skills. And they have done collaboration work, and they know how to move beyond faux collaboration to get to true collaboration where change happens and where people get on board. I'm so excited to bring to you conversations that help you to do exactly that. The work that needs to be done to build cohesive, vision-driven teams. Now, with all of that said, let's dive into today's conversation. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Catching Up with Casey show. This is the 68th episode, which is wild to me. And I'm so thankful to my audience and to my guests for showing up almost every Sunday. So we have a message to put out into the world. And tonight, I'm excited to have another wonderful message. We're going to be talking all about this unexpected approach to empowering teachers through accountability and expectations. And I am joined with none other than Dr. Jo Lein. Okay, you're going to have to introduce yourself to us, Jo.
Sure. Hi, I'm Jo Lein. I am a proud leadership development coach with Tulsa Public Schools. I'm clearly a little under the weather, but I am also a recently launched Substack writer for school leaders and coaches to try and bring more resources and knowledge and expertise to our school leaders and coaches and instructional specialists all over the country with some weekly writing. And so that's a big part of what I do. I'm also an adjunct professor at Johns Hopkins University.
That's awesome. Well, I am super excited to have you. Can you tell us a little bit more about Substack writing in case our readers, well, I guess some people are coming on as readers. I hope everybody's coming on as readers.
I hope so. My readers. Yes.
But for our listeners that don't know, what is Substack writing?
Yeah, Substack, it actually is pretty new to me too. I have been writing about educational leadership since my dissertation, I would say, in 2017. Writing for publications that are awesome, like ASCD or Edutopia or Learning Forward, to provide small, digestible pieces for school leaders out there. And I was finding that I had a lot to say, but not the pace in which I could say it. And so I decided on February 1st that I was going to launch this Substack. And Substack is basically just a reader-supported publication. So we have major Substacks like Free Press, which are a lot of old journalists who used to work for big publications that when either politically they didn't agree or something happened, that they decided to join this sort of, I would say, group of rebels on Substack to join this thing called Free Press. My husband has subscribed to them for years. Finally, I was like, all right, time to take the plunge. And it has taken on certainly a life of its own since I started. I'm now doing a action step of the week to give coaching conversations more accessible to school leaders. Instagram has just taken over, and but it's really fun. Everything that I have on there, I do not put behind a paywall because I believe that educators will just pay if they think it's worth it. So everything's free.
I love it. That's awesome. So kind of speaking of Instagram, that's really where this episode came to life because I noticed, and you post about this a lot. So every now and then, actually pretty regularly, and this is one of the things I love about your Instagram feed is I know I can go there and you're going to have somewhere pretty like within recent posts, something that says unpopular opinion. And that gets my attention every time because I'm like, what's she going to say? Because I know I'm going to agree with it. But sometimes there are those where you're like, what are they going to say? Am I going to agree with it? But what you posted recently was unpopular opinion. Sometimes teachers need to be told what to do. And I was like, oh my gosh, we've got to do an episode about this because from my perspective, and I focus a lot on teams and building cohesive, vision-driven teams. So often I'm noticing that teams are going awry because they haven't been told what to do. So tell our audience a little bit about where that post came from in your mind and from your perspective.
Yeah. So I'm a big scholar of Brene Brown. And Brene Brown, of course, says that clear is kind. And I believe that very much to my core. And I've seen it play out, right? If you don't know the rules of how to play, it is an unfair game. And so that's one. Plus what the coaching literature suggests, right? If you look at some frameworks around how we should be coaching people up, and I'm not just talking about educational coaching, like not our godfather like Jim Knight or Queen Elena Aguilar or the technical guru of Paul Bambrick Santoya. I'm not talking about just like people in education. I'm talking about people who coach in general. We know that if someone is high will and low skill, we have to be direct with them. Cognitive coaching makes ineffective and inexperienced teachers feel stupid. And it is actually a really kind thing to do, to just say, here's how we're going to get you out of this mess.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk about some examples of like accountability measures that we could implement to support teacher growth and development. I'm really excited about some of the questions that I have for you tonight. We're going to start with that one, but audience, if you have questions too, please pop them in the comments. We want to see you active in the comments with like your reactions, your questions, your thoughts, etc. But what are some examples of accountability measures?
Yeah, I got to start with, well, I'll start at the site level, right? Because I think we can do site level and district level. And what's cool about someone in my position as a leadership development coach, I get to straddle both of those things. And I think that's a really important point, right? Because oftentimes we think of district people as being out of touch. And actually, there is some research to support that. That the higher you go up in leadership, the less self-aware you are. That was my most recent unpopular opinion post. But when you straddle both site and district, you can see how accountability can play out in different ways, depending on the scale in which you're working. So at a site level, I'll give you an example of one site in particular, Monroe Demonstration Academy in Tulsa. I just recently wrote an article about one of the things that they have done that has been really, really thoughtful, and that is institute what is called the teacher toolkit. And I got to give a big shout out to the principal there, Dr. Rob Kaiser, and specifically Ben Emley, who's a first-year assistant principal, by the way, and making a huge impact by his level of specificity in guidance that he's given to teachers. When Monroe experienced their turnaround, they had 85% of their teachers within their first 2 years of teaching. And if I cannot think of a more important time to be incredibly clear, it isn't when you have a teacher population like that. But they, with the teacher toolkit, they roll out one specific strategy, and then they use their own internal facing spreadsheet to track individual teachers on their performance on just that strategy. So all of the leaders, because there's multiple assistant principals, coaches who kind of influence teachers, all of them know who's mastered it, who's on their way, and what their most recent feedback has been about it, or whether they're way off track. So think of it as like tiering you tier your students, like they do that same system internally. Teachers don't see that, because that's not important, right? What's important is they know how they're tailoring their own feedback to each individual person.
Yeah.
So that's a site level example.
Yeah, I love that. Two of the things that you talked about is like the huge impact by the level of specificity.
Yes.
And in thinking about how they all focus on just one thing, number one, that speaks to the cohesion of their teams, which is crucial if you're wanting your whole school to move in one collective direction. That's where collective efficacy lies, right? But yeah, and I wonder too, though, I guess my question is, how do you feel like teachers have responded to that specificity? You mentioned it a little bit earlier, but I'm really curious to know how you feel like teachers respond to that specificity.
I think it would depend on who you're talking to, right? So if you're a brand new person that just walked in the door, you're like, oh, okay, I know how to win this game, right? If you're a veteran teacher who's like, turn and talk, girl, I've been doing that my whole life, right?
Yeah.
You're just like, okay, no sweat. Come on in anytime. No problem.
Yes.
Right? Then you got these people in between who are like stressed out about all sorts of stuff, have all sorts of reactions to any expectations, right? And so everyone's going to have a reaction to specificity. I think about this as game night. I love games. I'm actually an international backgammon player. True fact.
What?
Right.
Hey,
girl. A woman of many talents. I have many talents. But love a good game night. What's your game of choice? What do you like to play for game night?
Okay, there's too many options. Probably Bananagrams has been my most recent. And Blockus. We just started Blockus.
Blockus, love it. But like if you're learning a new complicated game, right? You have the person that reads the rules, right? And then you have the person that's like half paying attention. And then they come in and they keep asking questions all throughout the game. And you're like, if you would have paid attention, this would have been much easier. You got the friend that is like drinking way too much in the corner. And you're like, honey, pay attention to the game. Or you got the little kid who's like too young to be playing. And then you end up playing their game too. Right? That's the same thing that happens every time you roll out any expectations at a school level. Right? Yeah. It's just game night. Escalated.
Yeah.
And so
well, hold on. We gotta read some of these comments. Someone said, this is exactly what I've been needing.
Sorry.
I feel called out. So funny. Yeah, me too. But it's so true. It's so true. I'm sorry to interrupt. It was just too funny not to post. But yeah, it's so true. Man, what a great analogy of it's just game night.
Yeah. And of course, if you're the principal holding that set of instructions and you've just read those instructions out loud and you got that person sitting in the corner drinking wine, that's hard, right? That's hard to swallow when you know what it means for the game, right?
Yeah.
But that's why this level of accountability is so important, because in order to play the game, everyone's got to know the rules.
Yeah. Yeah. So true. And that goes back to your point. Like if you don't know the rules of the game, then it's just an unfair game. Like no one can play that game.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, okay, then let's talk about this, because I think this question will lend itself well to what we've just discussed, because there's like accountability, right? But then there's also like, we want to maintain autonomy, teacher autonomy, but then there's that fine line where someone can go into this level of micromanagement. So how do you ensure that teachers feel empowered rather than micromanaged?
Yeah. So I want to name that all of this requires balance, right? Oftentimes in education, we create these incredible false dichotomies. You could either be this or this, right? That black and white thinking actually gets us very much into trouble. That you can hold someone accountable and give them autonomy. It's true. Those two things can happen at the same time. So let's break this down a little bit. So autonomy is perceived control, right? So they have to have some level of control. So when do you feel most in control? Right? When you know what's expected of you, right? When you feel like, I know what choices I can make within this arena, right? And so I think that the clarity has to come first. And clarity doesn't mean that we're micromanaging. It means that we're setting clear guidance. Now, each school environment is going to be super different, right? The level of autonomy that is needed for teacher retention or for staff employee morale or whatever will vary based upon site. So will be the state in which we must choose to make things more controlled. Here's what I mean by that. So I'm sure you're familiar with the instructional core, right? It's the what is it called? From Harvard, the PELP framework, where it has student, teacher, and curriculum. You're in a triangle. And anytime that you change one, you change the others. Okay, so if our students change, we have to change as teachers, and we have to maybe change our curriculum because our students have changed. Or if teachers change, then that might affect our curriculum. It might affect our students, right? Now, we can control very little right now in education, especially with our growing teacher shortage. So if we can no longer really control the variable of teacher. Yikes. But we can control the variable of curriculum, right? And so we might choose to go to control that variable of curriculum so that we even know if we're winning. And actually like get authentic data to determine, is this the factor? Is if we take curriculum out of this and we just focus on teacher development, are we winning? Or are there factors in our student level that we're not considering here? Like, so that framework, I think, gives us a lot to think about when it comes to the type of intense scrutiny we need to put on certain things because of the environments in which we're in.
Right. And I think about the tightness of that too, right? Like it could, if it is too loose, then it's like an anthill being knocked over and people scattered everywhere, right? And if it's too tight, we run the risk of suffocation. And so I think there's a fine balance between, and it's kind of thinking about like the balance between not giving any accountability or expectations at all, and then being so overwhelming that it's just micromanaging our teachers. And to your point about like teacher retention and keeping people in a place where they want to belong, people are going to crave clarity. Because when there's not clarity, you said clarity has to come first. And I 100% agree with that. Writing a book all about clarity right now. That's the whole premise of
Excellent.
But think about like when I go into a classroom and there's not clarity around like how much of this curriculum am I expected to implement and to what degree of fidelity, and where do I have some leeway and what decisions can I make on my own? When we don't have clarity around that, then that's one of those pieces that we haven't controlled enough. And so all of those other pieces are affected. Like you said, I love this framework that you're talking about. Can you share again? Do you remember the name of it?
It's from Harvard.
Okay.
I'm gonna butcher it. I'm gonna look it up real quick for us.
You know what? I'm gonna put it on our audience. If you're in the audience and you want to look up,
PELP. I was right the first time. Look at me. PELP framework.
PELP.
PELP. PELP.
PELP. So if someone's in the audience and you want to pop that in the comments, that would be awesome. PELP framework. Just drop a link for us. Okay, fantastic. So tell us about some strategies. Like, if we want to align expectations with the school's vision, we want to empower teachers. What are strategies you recommend for holding teachers accountable, but at the same time allowing flexibility?
Yes. So this is a very simple answer for me, and that is weekly, one-on-one, practice-based coaching. Period. End of sentence. Here's the thing. Coaching is the single greatest strategy for improving teacher performance. It's the only thing we've got. PD, come on now. PD, according to research, we of course know if there's no practice, we'll leave 0% in the classroom. If there's some practice, 5%. This is our oldie but goodie Joyce and Showers 2002 reference. But with consistent feedback and coaching, specifically from administrators, it can go up to 95%. Some recent research about this has indicated that coaching is correlated to 5 to 10 years of teacher learning in a single year. Now that has to be consistent, weekly, practice-based coaching. And that's where that autonomy and accountability really lives, right? If I know you, Casey, you and your classrooms, your passions, your joys, the things that you love about your classroom, the things that piss you off about that one kid, right? I can tailor what I say to you so that it feels relevant to you. Nothing we tell them in PD or in a memo or anything will ever make an impact. Like, including things that happen from a district level. Change does not happen from the top down. Change happens in the classroom with children. Like, sorry, district people. I'm a district person too. We're not making the impact, right? We aren't. The teachers are. If we are not consistently thinking that they are the most important people in our system, then we have lost our way. Change happens there. And the weekly coaching really does empower people while still holding them accountable.
Yeah. And okay, so two things I want to mention here, because much earlier in the episode, you talked about how as you move up in leadership levels and you move away from the classroom, you do lose a sense of what it's like. And I have said that recently to some teachers, like, you, in your mind, I remember being that teacher that got so frustrated with my principal or admin or whoever, district leadership, like they don't know what it's like to be in the classroom. And I still think that that's true. Like, they didn't know. And I have found myself, like, I have lost sight of what it's actually like to be in the classroom on a day-to-day basis, because I'm not making those kinds of decisions. I'm making different kinds of decisions. And I do believe, like, teachers don't have our perspective, but they're not necessarily, I don't think it's our place to say that they need to know our perspective, right? Like, I think
they
it's
need to be
important for them
to that, the
exactly.
spots, right?
Exactly. 100%. You just absolutely took the words. We're like totally on the same page. We could just like finish each other. So I think that's so important. Like, we want them to be empathetic to our perspective and vice versa, right? Like, we need to be empathetic, because I don't think we can have each other's perspectives. But with that, there was something that you just talked about that I wanted to mention, and it has completely left my brain. But if we are wanting to implement change and we know it happens within the classroom, then it is so imperative that we get super clear for ourselves what it is that change is going to look like. Because we cannot help them to effectively make change happen unless we have painted a clear picture ourselves and we've utilized them to help us create this clear picture.
It's that vision piece. Right?
Yeah.
That vision, expectations 100%. Without vision is management. And that's not who any of us are, right? We're all leaders. Right. Whether any position you are in a school district, you are all leaders. Bus drivers, custodians, doesn't matter. You are all leaders. And if we lack that vision, we cannot truly be leaders.
Yep. Everyone leads someone in some capacity of your life. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And everyone has a boss.
And everyone has a boss. It's true. It's actually true. But, you were talking too about this weekly coaching and building that relationship and having that rapport, and it just being almost like this is the accountability piece. It's an expectation that everyone is coached and everyone does truly some kind of coaching. Like if you are a leader of some capacity, you're wearing a coaching hat, or at least you should be, right? But that in and of itself takes time to build up. That can take a while to get to that point. So I think that kind of leads me to my next question about just this ownership piece, right? Because we want eventually for our teachers to feel ownership. We want them to, that's where our autonomy takes place, is when they're feeling that ownership and responsibility. So how can school leaders cultivate that sense of ownership and responsibility among their teachers and their professional growth and the success of their students? Like, how do you see the ball getting started rolling?
I actually think it's important how you ask that question, because you said two different words, responsibility and ownership, which actually have two distinct concepts. Now, these aren't my ideas. I can't make any claim. Elena Noel wrote this book called Inspiring Accountability. Very good read. It's mostly designed for business leaders, but she defines those words differently. And I feel like it's important to define them in this way. So taking responsibility implies being judged on performance against a task or skill, right? Responsibility, of course, can be shared, which ensures that things are achieved, right? But it's about, to what extent did you meet the task or performance? And then, of course, we have compliance, which is another factor, which means that we're meeting specific requirements or standards as defined by the roles or job descriptions or whatever. But then there's ownership, which means that we're motivating ourselves to take action. Right? So the source of how we think about that, like source of what action is and who's judging our performance against that action, right? Those two things influence ultimately how we consider accountability, right? Which are often synonyms for ownership or responsibility or whatever, right? But what's interesting is that a lack of ownership is always connected to a lack of empowerment. And so if we're not seeing action from our teachers for whatever reason, it's often correlated because they don't feel empowered in some way. Now, there could be lots of reasons for that, obviously, right? They don't know what to do, right? And that goes back to the clarity piece, or they feel micromanaged, or their educators are twice as likely to experience mental health challenges, right? They're depressed, they're sad. Like there's all sorts of reasons why someone might not demonstrate, quote, ownership. But we always want to ask ourselves that question. Do they feel empowered?
Yeah. So I'm taking Just so our audience knows, every time somebody gets on my show, I'm always taking notes, and they're the messiest things in the entire world. And sometimes I don't even finish. Yeah, I don't even finish writing stuff, and I'll go back and I'm like, I wonder what I meant by you can. I can't even read the word that I wrote. Hold. That's the word. You can hold someone accountable and still. And that's where I left off. Didn't even finish that. So, but what I'm writing down is a lack of ownership often indicates a lack of empowerment. Is that an appropriate way to say that?
That's Alana Noel. Give credit where it's due, which I thought was a remarkable idea.
Yeah, right. So let's say that our audience, who could be a myriad of different people. So it could be instructional leaders, like principals. It could be assistant principals, district leaders, whatever. Teachers, it could be anybody out there who really wants to lead well. And they are noticing a lack of ownership. How do you suggest they go about identifying where there is a lack of empowerment? Like, what could be a good next step for that?
When in doubt, ask. Like, where could you feel like, I don't know, let's come up with some questions. Help me figure this out. Like, an example could be, where have you felt best in this job in the last week? Give an example.
Love it.
Where have you felt the most stuck? Like, that should give you an indication. What is one roadblock, if it was gone, would make your job easier?
Yeah.
If you were to choose, let's see, if you were to choose one attribute that you need to possess in order to meet your goals, what attribute would that be?
Yeah.
So people hold the answers. Yeah. If we're willing to ask the questions. When I was 30 years old and an assistant superintendent for the first time, holy moly, I thought I was going to get eaten alive. And I did. And another smarter person than me said, Joe, they have the answers. Just get them talking. And I was like, whoo. Yeah. I don't need to have all of them. They have the answers. Ask them.
Yeah. Yeah. It takes a load off. It takes so much pressure off of you as a leader when we can believe that we don't have to have the answers, that our people have the answers. I did an episode with Sherry St. Clair months ago. I don't even remember what the date was, but she talked about listening tours. That was part of what we discussed, is how do you gain feedback and gain insight through just listening tours and asking those kinds of questions that you just asked, and just sitting and listening. And my suggestion to you, audience, if you are willing to be vulnerable enough to ask those questions that are very simplistic but will give you so much information, my suggestion to you is to just listen and refrain from justification. Because our tendency when we ask those questions, Joe, is to try to justify why something happened the way that it did, or why we made a decision that we made, but that doesn't really allow us to gain any insight if we want to promote ownership, right? Like, if that is our goal. Yeah.
And ensure that we are all holding ourselves accountable, right? Including us. It's one of our many behaviors that we demonstrate when we're trying to avoid accountability is defend, deflect, diffuse, right? And deny. Those are the four. So defending is just, to me, a red flag that you don't want to hold yourself accountable.
Yeah. And you've posted about that recently. I think I've noticed that. Yeah. Just so our audience knows, I'm telling you, if you go to Joe's Instagram account, you're going to notice so many great little nuggets, just quick informational things that you need to know about accountability and empowerment. So be sure you're following her. And we're going to talk in a little bit, Joe, about where people can find you. So I want to wrap up tonight's episode. Are there any other things? Like, we talked a little bit about misconceptions about accountability already. You gave great information about those differences between responsibility, compliance, and ownership. I learned so much from you already about those things, plus so many other things that you shared. But are there other things that you would like to provide our audience, specifically thinking about accountability and expectations in relation to teams and building teams and ensuring teams are cohesive?
Yes. This is all about trust, right? We can break trust into the 5 facets of trust, which are reliability, competence, honesty, openness, and benevolence, right? And all of those can be connected to expectations and accountability. All of them can. And of course, without trust, you don't have a team.
Yep.
So you need those as the foundation in order to really have a thriving team.
Yeah, 100%.
And I want to name that accountability can look really supportive, right? Like, I exercise at a row studio, and I love my rowing coaches, but they have all different forms in which they can hold me accountable. You can have the person that actually walks over to me and is like, row a little harder, Joe. And then you have the time that's like, hey, look at the data. Look right there, right?
Yeah.
Row a little faster, right? And that's all accountability for me to go and do better.
Yep.
Right? Because ultimately accountability is about you performing at your best. And that's all it is.
Yeah. Yeah, that's fantastic. You've given so much tonight. I so appreciate you coming on the show. This has been fantastic, and I'm definitely going to have you again. So just be prepared for that to happen. Love that. But where can our audience find you?
Sure. So the Substack is where you'll find all the juicy writing. That is Joe Lein, that you can see my name right there. .substack.com. And as I said, nothing's behind a paywall, all available. And then on Instagram, I'm at educoach by Joe. I'm going to say that again because that was rough. Educoach, EDU coach by Joe.
J-O.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. And just so my audience knows, all of this will be in the show notes. So if you want to click on the hyperlinks to get to where Joe is, don't worry, it's going to be in the show notes. Joe, thank you so much for joining. This
was
such
fun.
an honor. Okay, perfect. All right, guys. Well, I will catch you next week. Be sure that you are sharing this with your colleagues and like-minded friends who need to hear this message. And until next time, we'll see you later. Bye, everybody. Hey there. Thanks for joining this episode. I would love for you to do me 3 solid favors before you head out. Number 1, subscribe to this show. I've got a lot of great guests and content coming up, and I don't want you to miss any of it. Number 2, share this show. Share it with your like-minded colleagues and friends and those leaders who are eager to build cohesive, vision-driven teams. And finally, connect with me on all the social media platforms. You can find me at Catch Up with KC on Instagram, YouTube, and LinkedIn. Until next time, go off and create teams that leave people feeling inspired, empowered, and eager for more each day.